All right, guys, so we are at 11:30. I want to say good morning, first of all, and welcome to today's webinar. We will be presenting cloud security in the virtual office. Arm your teams with safe and secure remote collaboration. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very special presentation. We have a presentation by two organizations, one, our very own HGAC, and another, Virtual Queue. Before we get started, can we go to the next slide, Greg? I want to introduce myself. I am Frances Rodriguez. I am the Senior Program Coordinator here at the Houston-Galveston Area Council with the TDM team working on commute solutions, helping you find a better way to work and a solution to your commute. Next slide, please. A couple of housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded. You will be able to access this meeting online afterwards. In the meantime, we do ask that you please make sure that you continue to stay muted throughout the meeting. At the end of the meeting, we will have a session for Q&A. At that time, we will ask you to please drop any of your questions that you have for presenters in the chat box, or if you raise your hand, we would be happy to unmute you and allow you the opportunity to ask whatever questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we have the introductions. We'll have a presentation by Virtual Queue, HGAC, Q&A. At the end, we will have a survey, and I will have some closing remarks and announcements for you. Next slide. So a little information about Commute Solutions and what we do and how we support our region. We are a service of the Houston-Galveston Area Council. We are funded through the Texas Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. We offer tools and resources that help people, employers, commuters, colleges, universities, property managers, basically anyone that is on our roadways, a solution to their commute, reducing traffic congestion during those peak hours. We've been in service since 1994, meaning that we've been providing service for the past 27 years. Next slide, please. Our first presenter is our CEO from Virtual Queue. This is Victor Quinones. And actually, fun fact, this photo of Victor was actually taken at the top of the New World Trade Center at the beginning of the pandemic. He actually had to go into quarantine for a while because of that. So he experienced it, all the hype from the very beginning. And obviously that's really when all of the virtual engagement and virtual meetings and everything kicked off. So he really got a firsthand class at everything with his line of work that he does. Victor is the founder of Victor's the founder of Virtual Queue, and it was founded in 2009. With more than 32 years of experience in information technology industry, his mission was to make IT smart, simple, scalable for his clients. Virtual Queue provides IT service, which features a hosted desktop solution, the Queue. Designed for companies of any size, the Queue reduces ongoing costly IT capital expenditures related to the end user computing experience. Virtual Queue has become a leader in the managed IT services field, delivering the highest level of customer, partner, and employee satisfaction. Mr. Quinones also serves on the advisory board for Dun & Bradstreet, has also received 2 BBB Winner Distinction Awards, and was honored with the Best Place to Work for Commuters and the Clean Air Champion designation by us here at HGAC. Virtual Queue was recently recognized as the Houston Business Journal's top 2020 largest Houston area cybersecurity companies and the Houston Business Journal's top 2020 largest Houston area minority-owned businesses, in addition to Best Place to Work. Next slide, please. Our second presenter is John Tran. John Tran has been with the Houston-Galveston Area Council for 18 years. He serves as the agency's IT manager and helps us to meet all of our IT needs. Graduating from the University of Texas at Austin, he has a degree in computer science. He began his IT professional career with HGAC as a help desk technician. He has worked in many areas of IT, including networking, security, server and application administration, and support, cloud services, virtual infrastructure, and now IT management. Next slide, please. At this moment, right before I hand it over to Mr. Quinones, I want to start off by just asking you guys a general question. All of our attendees that we have here with us today, the one question that I do want to know is, what are your top concerns and obstacles when it comes to cloud security? So feel free to drop your answers in the chat and let's take a look at what everyone's concerns are. Am I at risk if I work in a public space? That's a very good question. Do we have any other questions? Well, that's a very good question to keep in mind, and we will definitely keep that in mind. We have another question, security concerns, even with Microsoft and data breach? Absolutely. Perfect. Drop those questions into the chat and those concerns, and throughout our presentation, we'll see if those are answered. At this time, I would love to introduce the CEO of Virtual Queue, Mr. Quinones.
Thank you very much, Francis. I appreciate that introduction. I will do my best to fill those big shoes that you just drew for me there. So Virtual Queue has been providing virtual desktops for our customers for the past 12 years, going on 13 years. One of the biggest challenges that we faced early on was basically trying to make the environment as seamless and as smooth as your current desktop. And basically our solution allowed you to work from anywhere on any device. Okay, so fast forward to today, as the COVID pandemic has come upon us, just about everybody needs to work from somewhere, whether it be your home or on the beach or in the airport. You need to be able to get your work done, participate in your meetings, and know that your information is secure no matter where you are. So the solution has since evolved into a security first solution, and I'm going to walk you through that. So if I could address some of these questions that you have right now in the chat. Am I at risk if I work in a public space? The short answer to that is yes. And I'm going to guide you through a couple of common sense methods that you can use to be secure when even on a public Wi-Fi. As far as security concerns over Microsoft and data breaches, there's like 3 new data breaches a day that make the news, the front page, and then there's even more data breaches that happen that are not announced to the public. Everybody should be concerned. So we have folks 24/7 with eyes on glass monitoring all of our clients and monitoring the news and seeing what's going on in the world, just to provide a basic level of security to our clients. So yes, you should be concerned. And what I hope to do today is to give you some calm, some way to ease your concerns and help you through this tough time. So does increased and abnormal work hours increase our risks? So the basic answer to that is, does increased use of the public internet put you at risk? The answer is yes. So it's really got to do with the exposure to the network and how long you are on the internet that puts you at risk. Whether you're connected to your work or to your games or some type of Zoom meeting, it really doesn't matter. As long as you're out there, you're exposed, and we're going to walk you through some easy steps to to protect you. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, just a little bit about me and Virtual Queue. Like I said, we were founded basically to provide a remote work solution for our clients. We were co-founded by a couple of other folks and Microsoft. And we worked together with Microsoft to create the solution that we have today. So we basically partnered with the best. We're at a precious metal designation with just about every vendor that we provide services with or for. And we're interconnected worldwide with the top clouds out there like AWS, Azure, Oracle, and Google. So one thing that we learned early on, in order to have a very high performing desktop, you have to have a very high performing infrastructure and network. So, you know, I always say that weakest link, your internet, is usually what affects your performance and your user experience. So we added a couple of layers of security to that early on. And today we've got even more security in the mix. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So first, in order to understand the cloud and security in the cloud, we need to understand, why do people move to the cloud to begin with? So the main reason people change their infrastructure to the cloud is really about economics, okay? So the cloud gives you some flexibility financially. It changes your capital expenditures to operating expense. So you, instead of going out and spending, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars on servers and desktop infrastructure and all that good stuff, you can now rent that per user per month. You don't need to pay for it. And in some cases, you could even do metered, to where they charge you by the minute or by the hour. And the cost can be very affordable for very large amounts of infrastructure. So another reason is less management. You basically have IT in a box, so you don't have to worry about patching and always, you know, staying up with the latest version of the operating system or applications. So, and faster deployment. So, like, to give you an example, when our clients started all the lockdowns early March of last year, we got a phone call or an email or a text saying, hey, Baltimore's shut down. All of our workers need to be working from home. All the workers had to do was literally just log in to the system, and they were ready to rock and roll. Some other IT organizations had to go through a large change organizationally. They had to take infrastructure and bring it to the house and all that good stuff. With us, as long as you had a iPad, laptop, or even a home PC, we were able to log you in. So that was one of the big things that overnight, you know, everybody had to make a change to the way they thought about remote work, right? So, and then with less management, you get that enterprise security. So that what that means is you don't have to go out and spend, you know, millions of dollars on security personnel and security equipment, monitoring systems. It's all something that should be built into the box, right? And so one thing I will tell you is like Microsoft Office 365, which a lot of people use today, doesn't come fully secured from day one. So you have to think about that and how to lock it down in order to provide security for all your personnel. Okay, and then you're only as good as your last backup. So having a good backup and having it encrypted and offsite, I'm going to guide you through some of that, the options there. Okay, and then another reason why people move to the cloud is productivity, right? You can be agile, you can work from anywhere on any device, okay? And it should perform better than your local environment. Okay, and then of course you got collaboration. Everybody knows how to use a Zoom or a Teams meeting now. Back in the day, that was impossible. You had to literally spend thousands of dollars to set up a conference room setup and all that good stuff. Now everybody's PC is ready to rock and roll. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the meat and potatoes here on security. So with regards to security, it's kind of a loaded term, right? So I'm going to just take you step by step. So first of all, the obvious is physical security, right? So you're not going to have your servers and your infrastructure located right in the open, in the hallway or anything. You're going to have all your servers locked up in a secure place, right? And it's going to be only like 1 or 2 people that have physical access to that equipment, and nobody else is allowed into that environment. So that's the obvious. Now the server room has turned into a very large data center. It's about the size of several football fields, but it's still very, very secure physically, right? So that's number one. Number two, we start talking about firewalls and intrusion detection. So here we talk about the network. What's the network? The network is your Wi-Fi. The network is that wire that you take from your PC and plug it into the wall or to a router. That's the network. Everything, all the equipment that resides behind that makes the network happen. And in many cases, when you draw out the network, especially between 2 locations, you draw out the picture of a cloud. And that's where the cloud came from, is everybody figured out all the good stuff is in the cloud, and now everybody wants to be in the cloud, right? So you still have to have a firewall, though, that protects you from the Wild West, which is the public internet, and then your private data, okay? So we added a layer of security called the Q Fabric, and basically it's just hardened infrastructure that works together in order to lock your systems down. And then you have what's called a virtual LAN, which is a very private network inside of there. And then you have on top of that another client firewall there. So, but it doesn't stop there, right? So what's the number one layer of security in your organization? It's your people, right? So you have to have people, employees that have a stake in security. So we use a service for our clients called Know Before. And basically it's just like a weekly, monthly, quarterly training that basically lets people know about basic security. So how to secure your emails, how to secure your PC at home, how to identify a bad email or a bad actor on the internet. So that's what I mean by training. And training doesn't stop with just, taking one little class. You need to be alert and get alerts on what are the latest hacks out there and the latest vulnerabilities out there. Don't wait till your IT department alerts you. Try to be in the know, subscribe to some of these alerts that already exist out there so that you know what's going on. Some of the biggest threats out there could have been avoided simply by somebody having a good password, right? So like the Colonial Pipeline they got in with one user ID that had a very simple password that had not been changed. Had that password been changed, we could have saved billions of dollars, and the whole East Coast would have had gasoline for that 2 weeks that they were out, right? So, change your passwords, get on VPN, and then don't use the same password for your bank and all your secure resources, right? So that's something to think about when you're accessing the internet every day. Make sure you're on VPN, right? So if you don't have a VPN solution today, there are several out there that are available. We can certainly help you with that, but always be thinking of how do I get on VPN? What is VPN? All right. So VPN is a virtual private network. Essentially, it's like a virtual wire to plug you directly into your office or your setup. But what does that do to keep the hackers out? It takes that signal between your PC and the internet and it encrypts it. It just jumbles it up. So if anybody were to get into that signal, they'd see a bunch of jargon and special characters, okay? Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so this is the basic, what we call network topology, which is basically just the layout of the LAN for most IT directors. So most of you are out here as remote users. You're either a mobile user or you're sitting at home with your desktop, logging in. And so, but your IT department has to address all of these components in order to secure your access to the office and to the data. Okay, so you need security, one, for your physical infrastructure, but you also need security for all that Office 365 stuff you're doing. So you may have one or two OneDrives out there. You may have a Dropbox out there. You may have an iCloud account. Okay, all of those need good security to log in. So one thing I always recommend for those cloud storage is add two-factor authentication. Every single one of them allows two-factor authentication now. There should be no reason why you're not doing 2FA. Okay, most people don't even know that Dropbox offers 2FA. So that's one of the things I would definitely set up. But have a plan, okay? What if you do get compromised, right? So like I said, you're as good as your last good backup. So back up often, and don't have the backup on a device that's attached to your computer. Or if you do, make sure it gets offloaded to another site. So what do I mean by that? So a lot of people, they use a USB hard drive or a device attached to their computer, and they set up a local backup. Okay, that's great if you need to restore from a physical failure. Say your computer dies overnight, you need to restore to a new computer. That's perfect device for restoration. But it doesn't protect you from what's called logical failures. A logical failure is when somebody comes in and corrupts your data, whether it be you, let's say you saved over a very important presentation and totally destroy it, or it'd be a bad actor, somebody that comes in and encrypts all your files and says, hey, give me 10 Bitcoins in order to unencrypt this. That's what's called ransomware. So if you have a good backup off-site, okay, you can say, well, thanks, but no thanks. I'll take my chances. You can actually go and format your devices and start from scratch. Take that backup that you have from the offsite and then restore to the last known good backup. Okay, and what's good about that is the ransomware hackers, what they usually do first is go after your backup, your local backup. But if it's offsite and it's encrypted, they don't even know it exists, right? So you can actually restore to a good backup and then recover very quickly. Okay, so VPN, important. Virtual desktops is another layer of security. It allows you to have a work desktop and a local desktop, like say your home PC, and keep them totally separate. So you don't commingle data. You can't mix good with bad. It's totally separate. And then don't have a single point of failure. If you have one laptop for working, maybe have another desktop at home or another iPad or something that you could get back up and running quickly. Okay, and don't forget to test those backups. Restore one file or restore a folder. Make sure that the data is good in there and it's not corrupted. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I think that might be the last one. All right, I think we're making good time, right, John?
I do believe so.
All right.
Awesome. All right, John, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Again, my name is John Tran. I am the manager here at Houston-Galveston Area Council for the IT group. Information Services group is our official title here. And there's a couple things I wanted to kind of discuss here in my presentation. And a lot of it's going to kind of touch on some of the same points that Victor had mentioned before, this is going to be more of kind of like from a first person perspective, kind of like what we've gone through and how we've had to kind of go through this, some of the same things as we transition to a remote work environment. So can we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? Okay, so two things I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about the virtual office and working remotely, and talk about security. And the reason why I want to kind of touch on the virtual office and working remotely first is because I think it's kind of important to understand what is the difference between working remotely and working in the office. What are the threats? What are not the threats? What are the things that you have to kind of do to accommodate the remote work? And it's when you understand what those differences are is when you can actually understand why the security measures are going to be a little bit different and what you have to do to keep yourself secure. So we're going to talk about how is it different from in-office work and what can you do to enhance your virtual office to make your experience and the experience of your colleagues better. And then we'll then talk about security and what's different with security between in the office security and having to provide the security on your own as you're working from home or working remotely. And then I want to go through some of the examples that we've of what we've done to implement to enhance our security stance for our own staff here. So next slide, please. Okay. So how is it different from in-office work versus, with regards to remote work? Well, one of the things, and it's kind of obvious, is that access to the necessary hardware. Obviously, when you're in the office, you have access to printers, you have access to scanners, you have access to barcode scanners, you have access to staplers, all that stuff. As you work from home or work remotely, you may not have access to that. You may not have an access to your scanner. So how do you scan documents to send to somebody? How do you print something so you can mark up on it and perform your work? And the reason why that this is an important point is because when you don't have access to this hardware, you start to compromise. You start to find workarounds to do this, and it's that process of doing the workarounds that you may not think about security. You may think, oh, I can just email this to my personal account and then send it off from there and then, get the job done. Well, it does get the job done, but is that really the most secure way to do it? Probably not. The next thing is different is obviously your physical work environment. It may not be optimal. I'm sure we've all been guilty of this and kind of worked from our bed. We clock in at 8 o'clock and we're still sitting in bed at 8:05 just to answer a few emails, and then we go and brush our teeth and then get ready for the work day. We may be working from our dining table where we have a bottle of water sitting on the table, or we have our kids eating their breakfast just right across from us, who may spill their syrup, or they may make a mess. So that physical work environment may not be an optimal situation, and that in itself can cause or be a threat to your security. Security in the sense of your files may accidentally get deleted, your laptop might get knocked off the dining table, syrup may get spilled onto the keyboard and render your laptop inoperable, and in a sense like that, you're going to lose your data. So that's one thing to be aware of. You may be using new tools for communication and collaboration, and the issues with learning how to use new tools is that you can definitely do stuff that you don't necessarily want to. So for instance, if you're using OneDrive for the very first time, that's all and great. It syncs up to the cloud, you get backups on it, but then you have the features of like being able to share out your documents from OneDrive. And if you don't do it correctly, you may share it out inadvertently to people that you don't want to see that document, and then that in itself can be a threat to your data security. So that's another thing that you may need to um, be aware of. And then, learning how to use those new tools. It kind of touches on what I said earlier. You have to learn how to use it in order to use it effectively, and that just adds time to your day or to your work, and you may not fully learn how to use those tools, and so you may inadvertently use it improperly. And it kind of an off-topic thing, but still very relevant to what's different in with remote work and in-office work, is obtaining signatures. That was one of the one of the things that was very difficult for us to kind of adjust to, because we were very used to printing out a document, walking it over to our manager to sign, and then walking over to our director to sign, and then walking up to our executive director for final signature. That's not the case in remote work anymore. You have to be able to somehow be able to capture those signatures virtually, whether it's through email or through a shared document or what have you, and ensuring that you're sending it properly and that the correct person is actually signing it. Because before, I could walk up to my director and she would sign it, and I know exactly that it's her that's signing it because I can see it. But if I email it to her, how can I guarantee it that it's actually her that's signing it? So those are some of the things that we have to understand, that that's different in office work versus remote work. Next slide, please. Okay, so what can you do to enhance your virtual office space? Well, one important thing that you can do is actually kind of step back and actually evaluate your workspace. If you find that you're, working off of your bed, or you're working off of your dining table, see if there's another place that you can work off of. And if there isn't, maybe you can make arrangements on how to adjust your current workspace so that it doesn't cause any pose any threats to your equipment or to your data. If you have water on the dining table, make sure you go ahead and get rid of that. If you're, in the bed and it's kind of high off, and your kid happens to jump on the bed and kick off the laptop, well, make some provisions so that you don't, so that doesn't happen. Not really sure what you can do in that case, but that's something that you should just definitely take a look at. I would say invest in higher quality or purpose-built equipment. And the reason why I say that is because, for example, let's say your remote work environment is a Starbucks. And you go in there and you're having a virtual meeting and you're talking about something of sensitive nature, or you're talking to a customer that may deal with sensitive information. Of course, if you're, speaking there, over the speaker where the person that's sitting behind you can hear, well, that may not be the ideal situation where, the person can hear your customer, blurt out their driver's license number or their social security number. Where in this case, if you had a pair of headphones or a headset, you can isolate that conversation to just yourself, so that the people that are around you won't hear that conversation, or at least hear the bit of information that they don't really necessarily need to hear. So that's what I mean by investing in higher quality or purpose-built equipment, is to kind of really help you keep your information and keep the data where it really needs to be. Another thing to consider is consider your work style or routine, and make adjustments for it. If you are in a Starbucks and you are talking in about sensitive topics, maybe save that conversation for when you can actually get home, or save that conversation for when you actually get into the office, and you're not surrounded by people that you wouldn't want to hear you or look over your shoulder and see the document that you're working on. And then lastly, leverage technology for collaboration. In this environment where everyone's remote, it's very hard to get somebody to work on something impromptu. work. You can say, hey, can you just take a look at this document and work on it? You would have to call them up on Teams, you would have to call them on Zoom to get them to do that. And that's not the most efficient way of doing things. And so if you leverage technology like Google Office or Microsoft Office 365 and use some of those collaboration tools, then that makes it much easier for you and your colleague to actually work on a document and collaborate at the same time. It makes it much more efficient. It helps to keep you two from overstepping each other and overwriting some documents, and it even keeps all your documents all in one place rather than having a copy of this in your email and a copy of this in his email and then a copy of this in another email, and then you kind of you have this information that's everywhere that you may not want to keep or may not want to have there necessarily. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the security and what's different about it. Why is it different, and why do you have to be aware of that? Well, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that you have less control of your environment. Going back to my example before, when let's say you were working at a Starbucks and you sit down at a table and there's no one around you, and you figure, oh, I can go ahead and work on this document of sensitive nature, and then you're into the document and you're working on it, and then all of a sudden somebody sits down behind you and you're not really aware of it. Well, that person can definitely look over your shoulder, see the information that you're working on, and you may not be aware of it until it's too late. So that's what I mean by you have like less control over your environment. The physical location of and access to your assets. So obviously, if you're working remotely, your company's IT team may not have physical access to your laptop, and so that makes it much more difficult for us to. I say us because I'm part of IT. It makes it difficult for the IT team to get access to that hardware. So if you are experiencing some issues, if you laptop happens to be compromised, it's very hard for us to actually go and troubleshoot that or assess the situation because of the remote location. And again, going to the next point here, the frequency of the updates and the ability to perform them makes it more difficult for your IT team to do that as well if they don't have the infrastructure in place. So like here at HGAC, most of our staff was here in the office, and we were able to do updates and apply new patches and everything, no issues at all. As soon as we went 100% remote work because of the pandemic, we found that updating the laptops, updating the desktops became much more difficult, and so we ourselves had to reevaluate some of the tools that we have to make it so that we can actually do the updates when we need to do the updates. Increased number of threats and threat actors. That's another point of security that you need to be concerned about. And I say increased number of threats and threat actors is because when you're working from home, you may not think that your child or your dog or your cat is a threat or a threat actor, but in fact they are. Your laptop sits on top of your desk, your dog or your cat jumps onto the desk and knocks the laptop off. That's going to drop about 3 or 4 feet, drop onto your tile floor, concrete floor, and break it most likely. And then that PowerPoint presentation that you may be working on that's due within 2 hours is gone if you don't have it backed up. Your child may come in and push a couple buttons on your laptop. I have a 3-year-old at home who loves to push my buttons and loves to push the buttons on my laptop too. And there's times that if I hadn't locked my machine, that he could have done something. And so we don't think of them as like threat actors, but in fact they are. And so that's something that you need to be aware of. And then finally, your increased tendency to compromise. And this kind of goes back to the point I made a few slides back that You're working from home. It's a different environment. You may not have the necessary tools that you used to have, and so you start compromising. You start finding workarounds, and those workarounds may not necessarily be the ideal way of doing things. Like I said before, you could be scanning a document and sending it to your personal email and then sending it off. That definitely isn't the ideal thing to do. Next slide, please. Okay, and then finally, I just kind of want to talk about some of the things that HGC has done to help ensure that we have a secure environment for our staff, whether they're working remotely or whether they are on premise. First and foremost, the most important thing that we've done, and we've had this before we went remote, but it just proved itself, proved its value even more so when we went remote work, was security awareness training. We have so many emails that comes in and they're phishing attempts. They are, posing as like, our higher ups to, get them to try to send them, credit cards and gift cards, and that's a daily thing for us. And even with all the systems that we have in place to filter out this unwanted content, there's still some that may come through, and it definitely does come through. And having that security awareness training to train our staff to properly identify and to know what to look out for has been invaluable. And I do believe Victor mentioned that some of the services provided is know before security awareness training. That's one of the tools that we actually use in-house to train our staff, and it's been that's the most important thing we've done so far. We've adopted a cloud-based security product. With staff being remote and also in the office, and not knowing exactly where they are, them connecting to VPN not 100% of the time, and which is valid. If you're working from home, you may not need to connect to VPN to access some of the resources, and that's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that they're exposing themselves to anything. They could be just working on a document or so, but we don't have access to their computer anymore, so we can't do any of those updates and security patches and stuff. And so we've adopted a cloud-based security product so that it removes that VPN component for managing those resources. So that's been a big plus for us in being able to patch and update our hardware. We've adopted a central virtual communication tool. In-house, we are strictly a Microsoft Teams environment, and that actually was a really good idea that we did, because if we had opened this up and allowed all of our staff to use whatever tool they want, whether it's Cisco, or whether it's GoToMeeting, or whether it's Zoom or Teams, what we would have happen is we would have had a lot of like data sprawl. So we would have documents that sits on one platform, and documents that sits on another platform, and chats that sits on another platform, and links that were shared out on a different platform. And from a compliance standpoint, that makes it very, very difficult to be able to meet those compliance requirements. And so by adopting a virtual communication tool, we kept it into one platform, and we have a much more tighter control on the execution of that tool and where all of the data is. And finally, we've increased our documentation for our users. And what that did was it gave all of our users a resource to resolve issues themselves. Given that we're in a remote environment, access to IT may not be as handy or as readily available. And so by increasing our documentation, our users themselves can have a reference to look up at, and resolve issues themselves, or figure out questions on their own, and kind of keeps everything in a more, what's the word, uniform manner. Everyone does everything kind of like the same way rather than trying to compromise and do various other things. And I do believe that's the last of my slides, and so I should be done with my portion of it. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Wow, we have so much information that we learned today about the cloud and security and some of the best practices that HGC has implemented as well. I can attest those, John, those tests, those phishing tests that you guys throw out. Those make me look at every single one of those phishing attempts that comes through my email, I tell you. So good job on those. At this time, I'd love to open it up for any questions. If anybody has any questions for our presenters, please feel free to either drop it in the chat. You can also raise your hand. If you raise your hand, we'll be able to unmute you and you can ask your question as well. Any questions?
Looks like there's a question about the alerts comment I made. What alerts should we subscribe to be aware of the newest threats that can affect us while we are in the cloud or on the internet? So my recommendation is to take a look at FBI.gov. They have a good alert system newsletter that is accessible to just about anybody. And then CISA.gov is also a good resource to get alerts. Most of these are geared towards security professionals, but with a little help from Google, it's relatively easy to find out how to translate it into English in many cases. But what it does is gives you an insight on what's happening out there before it makes it to the news in many cases. So much of the news feeds actually subscribe to FBI.gov and CISA.gov. So I'll share that in one of our follow-up emails so that everybody has that link.
Perfect. Thank you. It looks like we have someone with their hand up, Diane Demagus. Greg, can you go ahead and unmute her so she can answer her question?
I have allowed her to talk. There you go.
Thank you.
Hear me?
Barely, Diane.
Oh, let me see if I can increase. How about now?
That's better.
Okay. So we talked about double, process of like authentication and whatnot, and we're always told to like change our password. And then not to have it across like other apps and programs. So I guess my concern is, even if we pick out the most difficult password to guess, does that really matter if the savvy hackers have access to get into our system through, I guess what they call a backdoor? Is there some level of protection? I mean, I may be answering it myself. I'm sure yes, if I pick a difficult password, but if people want to get in, they're going to get in. So is there anything that we can do, like, yes, picking a difficult password to guess, like you said, having to process authentication, not through work, but even just in our personal day-to-day, some of the things that we can improve our odds that that doesn't allow somebody to steal something from us. Paying attention to our surroundings and whatnot, that's kind of given, but anything with our electronics that we can do, or if they really want to get in, they can, so there really isn't a point.
Yeah, this is John here. I'll kind of speak onto that. So the whole point of having like a complicated password is just to prevent people from guessing, what that password is. So that's just one aspect of it. So obviously, you don't want to use password 123 as your password, because hackers, that's like the very first thing they'll try, or the default passwords of ABC 123. So it's very important that you do change that, and change that to something that's a little more personal. Now, you don't have to make it 38 characters and it's all jumbled letters. That's a little excessive, and that probably makes it a little more headache for you than anyone else. In something like that, I would just suggest like kind of using something a little more personal, but not necessarily using data like your your date of birth or your street address, because all of that somebody can figure out if they really wanted to try to take a guess and hack into your account. The other thing is that you know, you don't want to use like the same password for multiple systems, because if one of those systems, let's say Gmail gets compromised, and you use that password for your Gmail, for your bank account, for whatever, and someone gains access just to your Gmail, they'll know your password. They'll know that you bank with Bank of America or with Chase or whatever it is, and then they can try and guess and say, okay, I'm gonna try this password here, and boom, they get yourself in. So that's the other thing about having different passwords, is that it eliminates that threat. And then the third part of that is changing your passwords often, so that if 6 months down the road, Gmail does happen to get their account hacked and your information is compromised, that if you did happen to use that password with some other account, since you practice this method of changing your passwords often, whatever password that they have is no longer valid 6 months down the road or 3 months down the road whenever you change the password. And then, of course, two-factor authentication. That's probably the ultimate way of securing your account, because who cares if somebody did gain access to your password? They try to log in from it. The system knows that it's a different account, so it's going to send out a secondary, hey, Diane, is this you? And that goes to your phone. And so then you look at it and you're like, oh, no, I'm not trying to log in here. And then you can just deny it. And then from there, that at least buys you time to go in and check your account and say, okay, somebody trying to log into Google. If they are, I'm going to go ahead and just reset my password now. So all these things kind of combine together to make a more secure environment.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh,
Can I add a little bit to that? So one thing you talk about Google, if you go into Google Chrome and let's say you're saving your passwords to the password manager there, if you do a quick security check inside of Google Chrome, it'll tell you if your passwords are compromised already, and it gives you a link to those sites to go and change your password right from within Google Chrome. So that's a helpful tool to see if maybe you've already been compromised. Don't use a password more than a year if you're going to put a time limit on it. All your password is slowing the hackers down. It's not necessarily preventing them from getting in.
Awesome. Thank you for those responses. It looks like we have another question. What are the best ways to secure an environment that is mixed with some personal equipment and some office issued equipment, like a work laptop, but a personal cell phone, work desktop, but a personal laptop?
Can I address this one? So
Absolutely.
this
Go right
is kind of what we do for a living. So we call this BYOD, bring your own device. It's a methodology where you actually can go to the Apple store, buy your own nice little MacBook Pro, and then utilize it for work and for personal use. So the way we lock them down is we create what's called a virtual desktop environment. And the actual work desktop is actually located inside of the corporate infrastructure. And you are basically using like a mainframe screen to access that remote desktop. And what's nice about that is you can use it from that laptop and any other device. Also, added bonus is no data gets stored locally. So if you are using a personal device, I would shy away from using a business OneDrive or a business cloud account on that personal device, because then your personal device now has access to those that data. And if you do have a man in the browser attack or something that's already residing on your personal desktop, say your Symantec software was out of date, 3 years ago, and you didn't renew, and you actually have a virus on that virus would actually have access now to your corporate data and could then turn around and access any data that you have access to. So here's another tip. Don't log in with admin privileges on any device, period. Always use some form of elevation technique so that you have to type in another password just in case some virus is trying to install itself. So like, for instance, I don't log in as an administrator. I log in as Victor Quinones user. If something, or if I need to install an app, it actually prompts me for another password that's elevated, and then I can install that. So that's another layer of protection there. But using personal devices is here to stay. I just recommend you do a little research on bring your own device. There are a couple of best practices out there available today. And if you need to talk more about it, feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. I have dropped a survey into the chat box. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. It's very short. It'll take 15 seconds of your time. Before we head out, I want to make a couple of short announcements. We have another webinar coming up in August 12th at 11:30 a.m. We will have Managing the Hybrid Environment, Best Practices for Managers and Employees. So if you're available to join us, we would love to have you back for our next webinar. Also, we have Commute Solutions Month, which is going to be the entire month of September. We have a ton of events and a ton of activities within the Texas Medical Center, the downtown area, different management districts around our region, and we really love for you to be able to participate with our Commute Solutions Month. At this time, I would love to thank our presenters. Can you go to the next slide, Greg, so we can have their information up? I'd love to thank our presenters. Here is my contact information. I will drop the information for Mr. Quinones and John Tran. Do we have a slide with that information? With their contact information? There we go. There's a contact information for John Tran and Mr. Victor Quinones. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We are here to help. We are happy to help. And yes, looks like we are on time. If we have nothing else, no other questions, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. John, thank you so much. Victor, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a good day.
Great job, everybody.